What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Yours Truly podcast. I'm your host, Christian Baxter, and today we have a special episode as a response or a review of the Midwestuary Conference held in Elmhurst, Illinois this last week. Estuary conferences are connected to, you could call it the estuary movement or estuary in the United States, estuary abroad, even in Europe. And this is kind of downstream from Paul Vanderklay's work with digital community, digital connection, digital hospitality, and bleeding into meat space, MEAT, meat space, and creating the protocol for the estuary conversations, saltwater, freshwater, religious, non-religious, seeker, just coming together to try to have meaningful conversation. And today I was approached by on Twitter, Skankenstein, Matt, and he attended the Midwestuary Conference and wanted to see if we could host a follow-up roundtable. So I'm calling it the Zillennial Roundtable, related to, we've got Zoomers and we got Millennials and everyone in between. We got people in their 20s, people in their 30s, people in their 40s. And so I'm excited to see where this goes. This is going to kind of be an open format. It may be estuary-ish. We've got about 5 people involved. And so I'm excited to just kind of see how these guys experienced and responded to Midwestuary Conference and thoughts going forward. So don't forget, like, subscribe. If you want to support the channel, you can be a YouTube channel member, and there'll be a link in the description. Disclaimer, there's tiers, and I am not able to do all the tiers correctly or adequately. So it's really just, if you want to help support the channel, there's 3 different levels of support. And I do some occasional thanks and just members only videos. And there's always members only previews to these podcasts that go out early, so you can kind of get a sneak peek on what's going on behind the curtain here. So without any further delay, I'm excited to get into the Zillennial Roundtable. So without any further delay, I give you the Zillennials. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. And we're recording. All right. So, guys, thanks for getting in here. We may have a few extra guests pop in but we're going to go ahead and kind of get started with the conversation. So I said this in the intro, but Skankenstein Matt, he DM'd me and said, "Hey, are you interested in maybe hosting a follow-up for Midwestuary?" And I was like, "Yes, thank you. This is helping me not have to think so hard." I already told you what my week was like before I was telling Gray, but it was nuts this week. So yeah, and so kind of with that, we've got Gray. I labeled this the Zillennial Roundtable. Zillennial Roundtable. So we've got well, in this way, we don't have our mid tiers in here right now. That's who we're missing. But we got Skank and myself, 40 and 40s. Mm-hmm. Gray close, and Joseph. Close. Are you what, 38, 39?
Yeah, 38.
Okay, so Gray and Joseph in their 20s. Mm-hmm. And then Matt and Nick early 30s or mid and early 30s. So hopefully they'll get in here in a little bit. But yeah, so I'm going to kick it to Skank and let him kind of outline whatever was bubbling up for him to really kind of push this into existence. So go ahead, dude.
Okay. Yeah. So very quickly after we all got back and started kind of chirping each other on Twitter, somebody just talked about how just overwhelming the sense of belonging was for all of us that just got back from Midwestuary. And I coined the term it was a belong apocalypse. In a very real sense, for all of you guys that I'd interacted with online to a certain extent through Twitter, through the live streams and whatnot, I really do consider you tenuously, because it's still a digital relationship, but friends to a certain extent. But it's very much a relationship that I believed in the same way that in the Bible it talks about faith is, we do things by faith rather than by sight. For me, Midwestuary is very much all of these relationships that I believed I had. I saw them. Like I saw it for real. Like I really like genuinely experienced it. The people I met in real life are the same people I've been talking to. And so it was this deep confirmation of the fact that you guys are the real deal and we're building something truly special. And all of the grumping about the fact that you can't have friendships online is just false. It's just false. You gotta be careful, but like it's that was my major kind of initial takeaway. And I'm just excited to talk about what happened in Chicago and kind of my hopes for the future because I'm kind of churning with a lot of ideas right now.
Cool. So, Nick, as you're coming in a little bit late, we just got started like 30 seconds and you popped in. Skankenstein, he's the one who reached out to me to see if I'd be willing to host this. And so I threw it in his court. Just basically, this is the Zillennial podcast. So we've got 20s, 30s, and 40 right here. So Zillennial Roundtable. And so I just had Skank say, what is your initial thing? And that was kind of a play, if I'm correct, Matt, off of like my response video about feeling like I belonged, and then Rigel kind of played off that, and you were saying belong apocalypse, like so.
Yes, that's right. That's right. It was watching your video that caused that term to kind of connect and solidify for me.
So that's basically all we've said so far. And so I'm open. If anyone else, I guess maybe let's just do initial responses because that was like Matt's initial response. So Gray, if you want to start, well, then we'll go over Joseph and Nick, just kind of initial response to the conference.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot I could say probably abstractly, but honestly, I think one anecdote, especially playing off what Matt just said, like my biggest response would probably be there was a moment or a few minutes where we were standing outside on Saturday afternoon. I think it was before the comment section, so before the very last presentation of the conference, and I was standing with Joseph and Ethan for like 15 minutes, and we were just
I'd have mad FOMO if you weren't in that crew.
Yes, and we were standing there basically talking about what is this comment section thing going to look like, and we were honestly just joking about what it would look like to get up on stage and troll the celebrities, like by trying to figure out a way to waste 5 minutes of their time. I laughed harder in that 5 minutes than I think I have laughed genuinely. I reflect on this afterwards. Like, I don't think I've laughed that hard in a long time. And it was with two people that I had never met before in real life. I mean, we never even met online. Like, we had never spoken prior to 24 hours before that, which I think is really rare these days. I mean, I have friends here in town I see all the time, and like I've never laughed that hard or had a moment like that with some people that I've known for some time. And so that's not all of my reaction to the conference, but I think that encapsulates a lot of it. It was a special time.
Cool. Joseph?
Yeah, I total agreement here. I think coming at it from a different angle too is what I noticed that was really bizarre is that you have all these dudes and dudettes from these different traditions. You had Protestants, Catholics, Orthodox, Unitarians, if you can even believe that. No, but you had all these guys that had on paper different theological positions or whatever, or different worship I guess methods. And what was strange is I was looking at some of these guys and I'm like, I think I'm like more in line with this person who isn't even in my tradition. They're not Orthodox, but I feel like a greater sense of unity in terms of, like we're both like aiming towards the logos and striving towards it in a similar manner. And it's just a bizarre thing because, you could You could get us in a room and you could start like making a little checklist of, oh, do you believe this and that and this? And it's like, well, just it kind of transcended that. And I don't mean that in like a mushy way. It just like really did. I'm still kind of thinking through it, but I think it was really that moment where it's like we're all on this journey of like remembrance and looking back and pulling out wisdom and lost ways of thinking, or I'm lacking the right words to say this, but it's leading us in the same direction. And yeah, I don't think there's something quite like it out there that isn't parasitic. So it's pretty neat.
Nick and the bugs.
Yeah, you're gonna hear some cicadas.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess to put it very succinctly, like I walked away from the conference thinking, and of course there's a train now, thinking this might be a thing. Like I wasn't sure before the conference. Like I was like excited to meet people and to interact and to bounce ideas off people, to receive feedback and just interact, iron sharpens iron. But I walk away thinking like there might really be something going on. I don't even know what it is. And I know like PVK has gotten like flack for not being this like organizer early on. But I think I'd be curious to hear what Paul has to think, to that emergence and eminence idea that he like you have to let the thing get to a certain, like you can't identify or name a thing too early, or even what it is. So it's like something's been emerging and then this other thing's been emanating down onto it, or this little corner or whatever. And I think that process is still happening, and we'll probably get into like what we think that is. But I walk away thinking like this might actually be a thing, like not just some like trivial little group of eclectic people who are interested in the same things, but actually like first fruits of something. I don't even know. So I'm sure that makes sense to someone, but that's my like general brief takeaway from the conference for an esoteric conversation like this one, at least. Like I'm not going to tell that what I just said to my mom, but that's here.
I definitely right before we turned on the camera, I almost said the exact same thing. And it was funny in the group chat. There was a lot of like, whoa, did you read that? That I don't know if you read, but that's like going like, very specific thing. So there's definitely a lot there. So I was watching Neil Daedalus and Foxman's conversation. And so Nick can attest to this. We were sitting there during, I can't remember which panel it was, but I basically went up to write the question, what do you think Gen Z thinks about this? And like, that was my question to the panel. But Kale kind of took his high school teacher and kind of went there a little bit. But so that was the one thing, definitely he brought that into the conversation, Paul's live stream conversation. So I'm interested about that, considering our group makeup here with Gray and Joseph being Zoomers. And then, and so then the other piece, and then that's the one I want to kind of play with. And then there's a conversation with Neil I'm interested in on something else related to that, his other point about the discernment. But with this, so Matt, you said belonging, you belong apocalypse. Gray, you laughed so hard in a way that like what is that deep resonance that all you're like, why is this not in another shared group, you know?
Yeah.
And then Joseph, like I'll say something like this, was like a shared telos, you know, that's kind of what it sounds like he was like pointing at, you know, kind of a collective turning, and we're like different places along that path of remembrance, but that it's kind of like that's all seems to happen. And then Nick, this is real, and I think we also said this right before we turned on the camera, was Jordan Hall tweeted, he basically used the term TLC for the first time this week. I've seen him say like several months ago something along the lines it was maybe with Paul or on somebody's conversation, is like, yeah, that little corner of the internet, you know, is seeming real cozy right now, considering a lot of, I can't remember, Joseph, you said something like takers, what were you saying, parasitic.
Yeah.
So like a lot of these others, there's something like that. But just the fact that he's also said it and tagged basically Nicole Shanahan on the question. So it was like, whoa, that felt like, and that was probably my sense, was that it did feel, something felt real. And, you know, and I think so. I'm just going to put this out there. Any of that stuff's up for grabs, but I wanted to point to Nick's response that he wrote about on, and just talk about this little corner.
Yes.
With Jonathan Peugeot, and then how you interpret that, because that flew completely past me until I read your article, and that like kind of shook me a little bit. So the name, this little corner, what that brought to your mind whenever you wrote about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about the name for a while, because I've never like been in the Peugeot corner, you know, like hanging out with the symbolic bros, but I definitely his ideas have helped me see the world probably more than anyone else in the corner, like around here. So like I can't like duel in a critique on his metaphysics or whatever, but I just know that he's helped me to see better. But with that, like with the names of things, like it's always been in my mind, like not even in a wooey way, just like in a thinking way. Like even like someone like Peterson, like his name being Jordan, and like he's helps people cross, you know, all the time the river. And then maybe his destiny is to convert to Catholicism as son of Peter there. But anyway, you get my point. Like I've always been thinking like this. Sorry.
Well, and then you have the Jordan, and then you have all these Johns. You know, we have all
I was
these.
going to say the same thing. It's so not a coincidence.
Don't leave Mount Matsmore out of this. There are way too many Mats running around this place.
There are. You know, I was going to say, oh, now Nick's not going to hear this, but the Chesterton quote that he shared in his Substack reflection is, I mean,
can you get the essence of it?
Yeah, honestly, I have it pulled up actually right here. I will just read it. Sorry, guys.
It's all right.
I had it pulled up and then basically, you know, now I can't find it, of course, but basically the Chesterton quote is like talking about unity, and he starts it by saying, you know, the discrepancy over whether a certain thing was written by 1 man or 100 men. But then Chesterton makes the point that, you know, there was more unity in 100 men during the time of antiquity than there is in 1 man today. And I feel like that quote is just, you know what? Actually, I have it right here. I'm just going to read it because it's better.
I am back. We finally caught a mouse, and my wife was freaking out. I was like, this is terrible timing, but she's like, you know, anyway. So it's taken care of.
Gray's picking up on your Chesterton quote, and so he'll read it and then.
Well, so yeah, Nick writes. Chesterton says in his excellent introduction to the Book of Job, where he's defending its unity of authorship against critics, trying to prove there was obviously more than one author and therefore it is somehow illegitimate. Quote, the Iliad may have been written by 1 man. It may have been written by 100 men. But let us remember that there was more unity in those times in 100 men than there is unity now in one man. Then a city was like one man. Now one man is like a city in civil war.
Mm.
And man, I read that, Nick, and I was, that just, especially, right after the conference just hit. And I think what we're all trying to describe, Chesterton, as usual, says really, really eloquently, like the feeling of maybe coming to a conference where you may not know anyone, or maybe you know a few people in person, maybe you know a few more people via the internet, but really none of us have in-person connections, and probably all of us to a degree would not have been drawn to TLC, Jordan, Paul, Jonathan, John, etc., if we did not, to one degree or another, feel that civil war within ourselves. And to be drawn to a conference like this, and then to have the experience or the feeling of, oh my gosh, there's like actual unity. I feel to be part of a unity here with hundreds of people here that I don't even necessarily always feel within myself. And how do I even experience that or name that or describe that experience?
So that's definitely back to that. To the name of the conference, speaking of names, Fellowship of the Spirit, that's like a, Fellowship of the Rings, like you get this like visceral thing. And we've been describing that. Nick, I want to toss it back to you to talk about where you landed, because it was beautiful where you landed that.
Mhm.
And I just want to kind of get a little bit of a discussion on taking that from that quote, taking that on further down.
Yeah. Are you talking about like what I was starting to get to before the mousetrap thing happened?
Sure. Yeah. Wherever you were going.
Well, yeah. I mean, like what I want to get to eventually, like in my with kind of what I said at the beginning here about like maybe this is a thing, but also Pajot's critique of like, because he did lay in a gentle critique of like, okay, like this thing is a thing, it has a name, kind of two names, this little corner and estuary, and estuary is sort of more self-explanatory, like more like like narthex, like in between the sanctuary and the outside, that's kind of easy to make sense of. But TLC, this little corner. But the thing about little corners is it fits right into Christian symbolism. Like either whether it's like Christ the cornerstone, which is a little corner of a foundation, or like even if you were to take and this is just me trying to make sense of this little corner, like what this thing that's emerging could be, or like early Christians in an empire, or like this little corner of the empire, like there's this like tiny little group, this collection of random eclectic people, and I'm not trying to reinvent Christian identity either, like from a purely Protestant, like postmodern perspective. But that is the world we're in, and we all do feel some sense of unity, some strange, like there's like a strange loyalty to Orthodoxy, small o Orthodoxy, but not a stringent need to like prove your laurels.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Stands on its own.
But anyway, that's like what I'm getting at with like, okay, like I'm taking Pajot's critique seriously because it's something I've thought about. Like a name is a thing of, but like this little corner of the internet, this little cornerstone of the internet, I don't know, because there's something going on, and the name is going to stick more or less. So like, what can that be? Like, what is it that we're doing? Well, I'll say this one thing too, and again, I'm risking giving kind of like a purely like Protestant explanation. I would say I'm actually more trying to make sense of Protestantism from a apostolic succession point of view. And I tried to pitch to Pajot like, okay, universal history, is there a way to view like the fracturing of the Protestant world as the diaspora was in sort of the Second Temple period, where like most of the tribes are just gone, like they're just gone. Now, there's plenty of like church fathers who see that as like the seed of the promise spreading throughout all the Gentile nations, and eventually, in the early church, it sort of comes back together. That is kind of how I see like the time we're in, and the place like this little corner is like a strange coming together of the diaspora. So, and then prepared for the digital age. So there's a bunch of loose thoughts there for everyone, and then I'll shut up and listen for a bit.
Can I push on two of those? The first thing is I want to add another kind of like layer of kind of biblical symbolism to the cornerstone. One other kind of chief feature of the cornerstone before it's incorporated into the building in like I think like Psalm 118 or something like that. It's not only is it a cornerstone, but it's the stone the builders rejected has become the stumbling block. So there's a lot of talk during the Chicago week about like the levels of friction or non-friction. And we've talked a lot about there's this weird sort of like either like force field that kind of like pushes a lot of people that try and watch our videos away. And I think some of our concerns are trying to make sure this thing gets bigger and better. Is like, how do we bring more people in? But if this is a cornerstone, it being a little bit of a friction-filled stumbling block is also potentially core to what this place is. It's just going to keep being the right place for a certain kind of people, and it's going to hopefully like push the people that it's not for away. I know there's a strong selection filter on the outside of this place, as I'm sure we've all experienced.
I'll just add, hopefully we're living stones.
Oh gosh!
but then also, one of my, drums that I beat and that, I took from Jordan Hall was just this. As he came from Silicon Valley, and kind of the big Eva critique that I rail on is just scale versus growth. And there are levers in the digital space that many of us, who've kind of built little channels, could pull a lot harder on. And I know a lot of them, and I think that has also been one of the things is like that Paul has tended to grow, and like, let's give a little sunshine over here, let's give a little fertilizer over here, like it's not here's industrial farming,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is also a posture that is really important, that is also frictionful, and it is more in touch. You're in the digital space, which is almost frictionless. How do you create friction? You don't play the games that the other people are playing. You play a different one. So that's how I hear some of that.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, and
one more thing. Go ahead.
No, go, Matt. You had another point.
Okay, yeah. Just the other kind of comment on what Nick had to say. His question to Peugeot about, I guess, specifically Protestantism being this fracture, and the question of like, can this thing be reincorporated back into the whole? I've seen kind of like Peugeot talking about sort of like neo-pagan movements as sort of ridiculous and absurd because he sees the old world religion of like indigenous paganism as a pattern that has been disrupted by Christendom. And because it's been disrupted, you can't restart it. And I think the one thing that he's missing is that is true of oral cultures, but that's not true of sort of cultures that have cyborg literacy into them. And I think this is where you're going to get some point further down the line a critique or reading of orthodoxy, which seems to be you guys, the Orthodox folks, pride yourselves on being primarily oral versus the written word. That seems to be something that's brought a lot of interesting light and interesting kind of like fruit into the discussion. But the Old Testament, I really, really think is sort of like a religion that is cyborgy with literature. And you have at least two examples of the pattern of Israel religion having been disrupted and being rebooted because they have refound their old texts. It happened with Josiah. It happened with Ezra. And so I feel like that's part of something that's unique. That's a unique kind of resurrection that's available to Protestantism.
Joseph, you haven't said much, and Gray, you were about to say something, so I want to if there's a
like
an
great.
Orthodox response, and then if there's a
I,
great
I,
response.
I really want to hear what Joseph had to say. My point was just a very small one about the friction thing, connecting to what Nick said about the sort of the emergence aspect with the emanation. If you think of like the emanation from the personality of Paul Vanderklay and the way he makes videos as having friction literally like built in, as he wouldn't say, oh, it's a feature, not a bug, because it's not intentional. Like, it's just, like he says, I'm just thinking out loud, but it's a feature, not a bug. And that emanates down onto the emergence of all these small channels and the way that both he goes about watering certain seeds, but also the type of characters, like you said, Matt, that even find themselves in these spaces and making the kind of videos between Grizz and all the different people. Like, that friction is emergent, but it's also because Paul was sort of the figure that all of this started to really coalesce around, at least really the true corner. Like, it's coming from both ways. I just wanted to connect that to what Nick said, and it's totally a feature, not a bug. And I'm like, man, keep Nicole Shanahan and people like don't tag him on Twitter. Don't tell him no thanks. We don't need any more polish. Like, we need everything that Grizz and all the folks have got.
I've got enough polish for the corner, believe me.
Who needs good lighting setups?
Joseph,
I want to see if you had anything swirling around, man.
Yeah. Well, first thing I just gotta say is, I think it's a kind of incorrect to say that Orthodoxy is somehow like, more oral of a tradition. I would say it's more
Embodied.
It's a more embodied thing where
that's what I was thinking.
you have this it's like a dojo where it's like you are descendant of this sort of fighting style, and you have this master who handed this technique down to you, and so on and so forth. And so I think a lot of people are looking to that as a vehicle to just you don't have that anymore, right? And so I think to not get so bogged down in talking about that, I just, what I was saying when I first mentioned about the unity and the telos that this corner seems to be heading on, even though we can't really name it. It's what I've noticed in even the Orthodox folks in the corner. It's not so much about like a restorationist project with Orthodoxy. Like we found the unadulterated purest form, and it's our mission to bring it back and conquer and subdue all other things. It's more of a this is a very helpful vehicle to help me remember the positive faith that existed. I want to have the same religion of St. George or something, like like an Englishman would think, or I don't know, or look at these figures in antiquity and this longing to grab that patrimony, as Cale Zeldin likes to throw around that word a lot, that patrimony that's been effectively lost in a span of like 3 generations, and sort of reintegrate that. And so I think that place of not getting so caught up in this. This is why I said that the corner is not parasitic. It's not. There's no subverting of subverting of other person's grounding, and it's also not a cohesion to a strict identity in something, and that it's through that longing and for that I guess that remembrance that is what is bringing people together in a non-toxic, non-combatant way. And I don't know, it's not a strategy that we've seen applied in I think any activity like this before. So
I think
Can I respond real quick?
let me give
Sorry.
one. Let me give
Oh,
one.
yeah,
point.
please.
Is just Jordan Hall's use of. This was a thing he worked on pushing a decade ago called the. It's either anti-rivalrous or non-rivalrous.
Anti-rival or something. Yeah.
And it has to do with specifically because of the digital and the way that this works, and that one of the things, as I've had like impulses to, one time I met with a guy who was telling me some pretty intense things he's done, and he was talking to me, and it's like related to this space, and I was like, my ambition meter was, going off. Oh, ambition, man, that really gets my ambition meter going. And as I think about like that concept of the non-rivalrous is, and this was too, actually, I wish Matt C was here to talk about his dream that he brought up on PVK's live stream this week, which that's exactly what I thought was like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to go to Midwestuary and that, so I'm missing something. But like we live in this crazy abundance that these systems want to trick us into thinking that that there's still like scarcity. And so like when I think about new randos and new channels and how this thing like fractals out, I think about that. It's like there can be a temptation to be jealous or to be like those types of things. And I've felt them in myself before. And so even along the ecumenicism conversation, there's just kind of like, this doesn't have to be that place. And so that's, I know that I went a little longer than I wanted to, but go ahead, Matt, and respond to Joseph.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, first off, like describing perceived differences between Joseph's tradition and my tradition. It's not criticism. Trying to appreciate you guys over there while also trying to harness and make available the goods that are particular to my community. And one of the things that we're concerned about right now is this sense of like cultural, like loss of cultural inheritance. The fact that previous generations may have made some choices that are costing all of us a lot right now. And the idea that it's all been set on fire, it's all been thrown away, and it is unretrievable. And I want to lean towards points within our common tradition that say that's not necessarily true. These things can be brought back. And there are certain tools that we've worked
finding
with.
of the law, as you were
Yes,
mentioning.
yeah, that's exactly what I was referring to.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. But also, Joseph, you've thrown some elbows my people's way on Twitter plenty of times.
Matt,
It's not on Twitter. What are you talking about?
What kind of Protestant are you, Matt?
I am I'm a Baptist on purpose. I like to use the term anarcho-Baptist because it really brings to the forefront the sort of like it kind of draws on the Mennonite-esque Anabaptist peace tradition. These sort of was it gosh, I'm spacing on the term right here. The nonconformist bit. The fact that the one thing that kind of sets the Baptists apart, they adamantly refuse to establish a state church. And so that's why I, like to use the appellation like anarcho. It's an idea of like, no, we're adamantly refusing to hold that center place in power. That's the currently where we are. And yeah, so that's where I'm
at least on paper.
At least on paper.
Yeah.
What's going on? What's going on, guys? Where are we going?
Yeah, I think it's interesting in your man, I think it was in the video that you sent us that you did with Cadell, but I mix up sources all the time. So this might not be where you said that, but you referenced, and we talked about this a little bit in Chicago, but John Mark Comer, and through him, people like Dallas Willard, Richard Foster, some sort of like Protestant mystics was, I think, the term you were using, which I think is a really apt description of those folks. But if you look at people like John Mark or his successor at Bridgetown Church in Portland, a guy named Tyler Staton, who is one of my, honestly, I think one of the greatest living preachers. If you haven't heard a sermon of his, he's phenomenally talented. But the two of them are really interesting figures to look at, and I was happy that you referenced them. They're quite popular in sort of the big evangelical landscape right now with Gen Z in particular. There's a lot of reasons for that, but that aside, I think a really, really interesting thing about them is they both, John Mark in particular, but also Tyler, if you read their books, you listen to their sermons, like you will hear more quotes of Catholic or Orthodox mystics or church fathers, desert fathers and mothers, than you will of any, contemporary Christian writer of really any ilk. And they don't, I mean, in some super reformed circles, they certainly set off fire alarms, but like generally because of Gen Z's lack of, this is a little bit connected to your point, Matt, like a little bit of Gen Z's lack of some of that cultural or Christian heritage, like none of those fire alarms get set off by, a 20-year-old kid who picks up one of John Mark's books, or Tyler Staton's recent book on the Spirit. The Holy Spirit was titled The Familiar Stranger. And these 20-year-old kids that pick that up, they're not, they don't have any defense mechanisms that maybe their parents' generation or grandparents' generation did of the Baptist or the Presbyterian. He's like, oh, whoa, hold on. We're quoting Catholics here. We're quoting, Seraphim Rose. Like that's a big no-no. And so because of that lack of just being on guard, like Elizabeth Oldfield was talking about, there's very much an opening to, oh, wow, like there's so much that can come together between these traditions, right? Like, which is the origins of the church and the origins of these doctrines and the way of living life. John Mark's all about the practices. And I just see them as being like really heralds of a movement in evangelicalism for younger people. You go on Twitter, like a few weeks ago, John Mark posted something stupid on Instagram, about, I don't think he was thinking twice about it, but he was doing his summer reading list and he posted a book by a Duke divinity scholar, that had written a book sort of against penal substitutionary atonement, or rethinking it. And John Mark said something sort of like, short about like, oh, this is like the death knell of PSA, and he set off just like all of the fire alarms around Twitter. But if you look around, it's like pretty much just people who are 40 and older who still have big platforms and everything. But like younger people, I don't think anyone's going to be like, oh, I shouldn't, pay attention to this person because I've seen so much of the fruit, so much of the reconnecting that someone like John Mark's trying to do. I'm not going to like throw him out the window because of, his lack of coherence or lack of adherence to, penal substitutionary atonement, which 2 generations ago, I feel like, I've only been a believer for a little while. I didn't grow up in a believing family, but you would think that a couple generations ago, someone says something like that, and it's like, don't read him, burn his books, So,
well, but I don't even know to what. Oh, sorry, Nick, you can chime in. I was just going to say, I think that aspect of a reemergence of theology as like something that people are keenly aware of. That, theology as such, it's not like your parochial church or even your an urban church. The congregants, parishioners, whatever have you, these guys were not really reading theology. This theology is something that is being really is a hot thing to touch on right now because it is very novel and it's tapping into that same impulse that you see with really intense fandoms
for tribe.
Right. And how we're seeing that play out with, all these media universes, whether it's like Dune or I don't know, like Lord of the Rings, or whatever have you. There's this longing that we've really brought out with where we're at with media that is saying, okay, there can be these really well articulated, thought over and vast ways of delving into a subject that has great importance. So this reawakening of theological interest, I think, is novel, and this is why I think the nature of the TLC is a helpful vehicle for exploring that, I guess. But
Yeah, I want the way I hear from my 40-year-old ears, and having lived through one iteration of kind of Christian shift in Christian evangelical culture, and I know Matt remembers like going just from like, Passion and Piper, and then they're like, and then something like kind of shifted into the Young Restless thing and it merged with Big Eva, and seeing how all those dynamics played out. But with what you're talking about with John Mark Comer and the like, the only difference that I see between a 20-year-old that skims his book or reads it completely is that we are in a meme. We live in a meme and an iconic culture that didn't exist to the extent that it does back when these publishers had influence in a kind of way a decade ago. So like, and I always harp on the old Redeemed Zoomer, but he basically is memeing Christianity into memeable bite-sized packets that
icons. He makes icons. He's an iconographer.
He really is.
And the cover of John Mark Comer's popular book last year, Practicing the Way, it's in the other room, but it is literally like the classic Byzantine icon of Christ, but just the outline. And nobody would know that unless you know that. But it's like, dude, you're this close to essentially making the cover of your book a Byzantine icon, and you are the pastor of an evangelical church.
So that's where I say these things are slamming into each other so fast and so hard, and it's like, and everyone's on screens, and I think that the difference from my vantage point, looking at what I think Gen Z and Joseph helps me a lot. With he was deep into meme culture as a younger man, and so as y'all saw in our DM when he pulled out the Wojak memes and stuff, but it's like, that I think that's profound. We're in a profoundly different place, partially because of that, and that's hard for the publisher's mind to get their ideas around, and it's not totally mainstream yet in a certain way, but it's coming and it's really close. And I don't know. Nick, you were going to say something earlier.
Yeah. Again, I make no apologies for the cicadas. The atmosphere is literally buzzing. But I wanted to pull together quickly like 3 threads. Number one, and I'm glad Joseph's here because I get to pull in like an Orthodox thread, at least like in a contemporary sense, which is that there's that one YouTube Orthodox guy, like Father the J.
Josiah
Trenum.
Yeah, he has that marriage conference, and it's very ecumenical. He's just like, hey, there's this one thing we all care about from a Christian perspective, and it's very important if we want to have any sort of civilization. And then I realized there's haters of this conference. Like there's people who are like
Sure.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah, ortho bros, and you see this in any tradition. Like you can see it in the voice chat from a different tradition of like, if it's not completely like my tribe, like it's like I don't want anything to do with it. And I was like, wow, like that's a thing. And I think that's rooted with nihilism as well, because if you're paying attention, like those who are not against us are for us. Like in a postmodern, Protestant age where like it's probably easier for Catholics than Orthodox, but I think even most like Orthodox can accept like, okay, there are people who are more aligned with the Logos maybe than people in my own parish, and who I can confidently say have some sort of connection to Christ. And that's not denigrating their sort of I hung out in an Orthodox church for a year, and I was never upset that I couldn't partake of communion. Yeah, I wasn't upset at all because I totally understood it and respected it. And even as an Anglican, I'm like, we're a little bit too loosey goosey, but I appreciate kind of us as like the middle way. Like you can kind of, even that one dude, that one YouTube guy, he was able to go partake of the real presence in Anglicanism just as a visitor. Like that's the place he went as he was like searching. So the first thread is that conference that Father Josiah is putting on. The second thread is
which Gavin Ortland's speaking at to tie that.
Yes, yeah.
yeah,
Okay,
and
keep going.
and there's a bishop,
what an crossover. Yeah.
yeah, there's a bishop from San Francisco, a Catholic bishop as well, and then I think there's a Protestant like marriage and family sociologist as well.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, that's one thread, which is like totally like that's great. It has to do with like the next part, which is the fellowship of the Spirit verse, which I'll just quickly quote Philippians 2. It's like St. Paul's saying this within the context of persecution. That's where like the therefore comes from. And it's therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, any comfort and love, any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind. Let each esteem others better than himself. Let each even look not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. But I want to focus on that first half, which is like, he's like, if there's anything, any consolation in Christ, any fellowship of the Spirit, like if there's anything, which I think that's what Father Josiah is tapping into. He's like, we can all get down with marriage and family as the bedrock of civilization across all these traditions. So like, let's get into that. And then the third thread I want to point in is what Jordan Hall is pointing to, which is like the emergence of a new age, the digital age. And like those three threads combined with, pulling in the conference with that verse and even like these other patterns that are playing out in other areas, like with Father Josiah's conference, like, there's something about the digital age, and Christian, I did listen to your conversation and also the recent one that Jordan Hall had, where it's like modernity kind of like separated it added to the fracturing and the separation. But there's something about the digital that, even though it's like the final boss of that separation, it's also, and you see this in the TLC, bringing people like back together.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can see the sort of commonality between those three strands, that's sort of what I'm getting at with TLC. It's like, okay, if the world is heading the way it's heading, like with Paul Kingsnorth, his machine analogy, there's all sorts of stuff like we have in common. Like there's all sorts of if any's, to take that Philippians 2 passage. And I think TLC is sort of this like emergent space that didn't come about because of anyone trying to make it happen, just providentially, where the if any can find a place where there's already a built-in relationality and a built-in trust. Because with all these, like we haven't experienced it yet, but the trust aspect is important, because it, like, we don't know who's who, like we do now, but there's like a 1% chance. So like Matt's not here, unfortunately, but for Matt and I, he took our deposit for the Airbnb, and there was a small chance that wasn't real, before we met him. And so TLC has this built-in like relationality for the digital age, that I think can sort of collect those if any's for whatever the hell's going on out there. So anyway, those are the three strands I wanted to kind of pull together and maybe add to the explanation of like maybe what I'm seeing, or like what this could be, that also is able to not just, again, fit into a purely like Protestant appreciation.
I want to kind of ask this question because like I haven't started an estuary, and there's times I don't have the bandwidth for that, but my very first video was this little corner of the internet and how I see it. And that's been more of my focus with my curiosity has been that more than the estuary movement. But these things are both tied to Paul Vanderklay. As far as like the nexus point, 5 years ago, you'd hear Vervaeke mention this little corner. You'd hear Peugeot and they kind of backed away from some of that on purpose, and was appropriate for whatever they're trying to do. But But I think that this is why, we've said Jordan's name, like, because his company that he was really successful with built the rails that streaming sits on. So his conceptualization for this stuff is like it's not philosophical in the way that Jordan Peterson was talking about meaning. I mean, he was looking at this thing very specifically. And I did a little video on this, but he said he watched when his daughter was in 6th grade, like do a thing on Minecraft with her friends. And they just like all of a sudden they played for like 3 weeks before the assignment was due. And then in the last like 3 days, they gave everybody jobs and they just went and they figured it out. And like one person was the narrator, one person was building this thing, another person was the group organizer. And so he was saying this kind of about Gen Z, and that the relationship with the digital is very, very, very different. And, I can kind of conceptualize it as being basically the first generation that dealt with social media, because that was kind of the thing. But, I don't think I can really conceptualize deeply things like Foxman and Joseph and others that deal with the digital thing, like from that level. But I think that is the corner thing is where estuary, and it's not that these things won't even have their own estuary, but I'm interested on you guys' thoughts on like that delineation. I think sometimes it's a little bit.
Yeah. Well, just to jump in real quick, the Fellowship of the Spirit that was on display at Midwestuary, I think that can be contrasted with because it's not unique to TLC for people who have never met each other to get together and feel connected. You see that at, you used to see it at like brony meetups, guys who liked My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, or speed running, competitions or whatever, or any sort of like super tight knit fandom that is its little corner on the internet. These in many cases these can get very obscure and they have an intense tribe and corner to themselves. But what I think is unique about the TLC is that it's a corner of the internet that is it's nested in that that spirit. What is that spirit? As Matthew Parlato famously asked, what is that spirit that's bringing it together? And I do think that it is a logocentric spirit that is bringing people from all these desperate places. So it's kind of unique. It's a unique fandom, I guess, which is not too self-aware of itself. And it's set on something that is not so superficial as this cool video game or something, it has a positive view of things, and it's not quite sure what it's aiming at, but it knows it's on a firm foundation, I guess.
Yeah. So I don't know, just hearing you say that, Christian, and then you, Joseph, like what I'm thinking. So when I talked to Jordan, one of the points we made later in our conversation I talked about was this idea of sort of we were doing it in the generational frame. So like maybe the millennial generation would act like a bit of a, the metaphor I used was like a ferryman, which is really interesting because it connects to Rod's, nostalgia talk of carrying the candle across the pool, and then your Substack, Nick, which was just beautiful the way that you spun that in, of this carrying across, in St. Christopher, all those threads, like the same kind of similar metaphors.
That also ties in Jordan Peterson, which is
yes, Jordan, right? And Jordan Hall and I were just talking about, he took my metaphor of the ferryman representing the millennial generation and said, what if we think of it as because we were speaking within a bit of a wartime frame. He was like, there's Moses, so maybe his generation. There's Moses who can see the promised land from the mountain, but does not get to enter the promised land. But then there's Joshua who fights the battles and gets to enter into the promised land. And pulling that together with what Joseph said, I guess I'm just thinking of TLC and the greater movement of being a collection of people from different traditions, but also different generations. So you've got like breadth and you've got sort of the age, both those that are potentially turning into or growing into a, to use like Verbachian terms, a distributed intelligence or a spirit that is capable of acting as that ferryman between, right, the pre-digital to whatever this new, you could call it the digital age, and we don't even know exactly what to call it. The post that 10,000 year event that Jordan talks about of what we're going through right now. And it's like really, really important to, because maybe me personally, like I think about this in terms of my family and my kids. I'm like, what, how do I raise my children? Like, you guys know that was the question I've been banging on about, at the conference and thinking about so much. How do I go about raising my children who are being born now in 2025 with how things are rapidly changing and about to change even more? And I think the answer is like in what we're talking about and what we're all sort of experiencing. I know that's a big thing to say, but it's like no one person, like no one father or married couple was born at the precise right time with the precise right inputs such that they understand the good of the old world and have enough of a foot in the new world to be able to help their kids or their community make that cross the river, right, successfully. But is there a distributed intelligence or a spirit that is made up of, right, people like Joseph, who was keyed into things about the internet culture that, even though we're similar age, I never was, and Christian, right, or even greater, you've got Paul, who's way older than all of us, and Jordan Hall down to, right, like the low 20s. And from every background and tradition, you've got Orthodox, Catholic, Anarcho-Baptist. Me, I wasn't a believer until 5 years ago, and I choose not to wear any labels. I don't know what I am, but a dad and a husband, and so that distributed intelligence is made up of all these various people of different backgrounds, ages, generations, has a chance, of acting as that ferryman or carrying the candle across the pool, in a way that no individual and probably no individual community even, in one certain embodied place may have success at doing.
Matt, you haven't talked in a minute.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel like one of the things we've been talking about lately is the breakdown of the post-World War II consensus. I'm not taking us way, way far afield, but I think one component of that is a certain like myth of stability. The fact that after World War II, we solved flux and we created this foundation on which life would be built and would be strong forever. And like, this is immediately aftermath of a massive world-shaking war that disrupted everybody's lives in some sense. And I think there's a certain, like, we got to let that myth go and recognize that human beings have always lived in times of flux. We've always lived in times of tradition. We're always on the way. I think the big thing that we're dealing with right now on a very like material level is the increase of speed that the internet is bringing. But I don't know, part of me is kind of poo-poos a little bit what you guys are saying, because I don't really believe in like generations as a strict, rigid category, because all like part of my Pomo view of the world is just that like all boundaries are porous. We're all kind of like oozing into each other. The generations are oozing into each other. It's
And even more so in the digital.
yes, yes, absolutely.
And that's another point of this, kind of the, like, whenever I did the little Gen Z reunion roundtable and Kale was there, and it was just kind of like, this kind of this smashing, it just feels kind of smashed a little bit in that regard. And of course, him in particular, he works with high schoolers, but like, So there's that aspect of finding the people that can that are more porous in that way, which is something that Rigel Thurston talks about. He's kind of in another corner of the internet where it's generally more probably progressive, however you want to label that side of things. But he's interested in the corner because he sees it as conservative openness, like kind of like a contradiction, and he's really interested in that. He said it sounds fresh to him, and then the other piece about the speed, Gray and I were in Estuary together, our Estuary group together at the conference, and you kind of outlined that from 6th grade, or I don't remember how it was, like 9th grade to 12th grade.
Yeah. The point I made, and I was going to say, I totally agree with you, Matt. In my description, I never want to be strict about the generation thing, because I really don't find the generational frame very useful at all. It's just what the frame we've sort of all been operating in.
I find it useful to label videos with, so keep going.
Yeah. Well,
gotta get those clicklies.
The point I made in our Estuary was just that, like, everybody uses these generational labels, but I'm a little bit of an in-between, born in 96, like between millennial and Gen Z, but those labels don't really feel like they apply to people that were born in a time where, so my example was in 6th grade, the most advanced device anyone that I knew had was like maybe a flip phone that flipped sideways with a QWERTY keyboard, and we all had desktops.
Sidekick.
Yeah, a Sidekick, and we all had like desktops at our house that we got to use more or less often. And maybe somebody's dad had like a solid, we had laptops or whatever. But they were slow and they weighed 10 pounds, and then by, 10th grade, we all had iPhones at school, and we're using a social media that, this will show your age of if you ever heard of Yik Yak, but Yik Yak like dropped like a nuclear bomb. Talk about a nuclear bomb, John Vervaeke. Yik Yak dropped on my high school like a nuclear bomb, where you have all of a sudden 4,000
like 4chan
kids.
for normies.
Yes, but geographically
right, and geographically centered, yeah.
And totally anonymous. So you had 4,000 kids who just got the very first ever iPhone the year before, and now can post anonymous, just basically hit pieces about other kids that will be guaranteed to be seen instantly by 4,000 kids at school. And 4 years prior, all you had was a flip phone, and you're 14 or 15 years old. And what does that do? Like, it's just indescribable. And so my point was just like the generational frame of like 15 people who are 15 years apart being part of the same generation. I'm like, dude, that was a 4-year cycle where everything changed.
Right. It's losing more and more. The generational framing's losing more grip as technology increasingly becomes more disruptive.
Absolutely.
But I think it's just helpful to identify like Zoomer, because it's like, this is it's like the children that, like disproportionately are engaged with, the internet at its full brunt, it goes without saying, like, you look at the mental health of those below 30, and just the trends that it's gone on over the past years. I mean, this is why so many people in Gen Z are largely extremist in one way or another. They're grabbing onto something because it's so chaotic, and I guess it's stuff like this in the TLC that I think needs to be nurtured, so that more, I guess, lost souls can get a safety raft and swim away from whatever spirit has gripped them. So
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, that's something else I've been thinking about of some strange digital collective that, in this kind of gets to like Grim Grizz's vision a little bit with the whole flotilla thing, that's just floating out there in the ether, or in the digital ether, in the internet, but intentionally, like no one's really. Maybe some of the younger guys are built for it, but no one's really like good at like creating content for the purpose of going viral. But like what really disrupts the system is if you do that, but the virality of it is to get people all the way back to like a live stream where you can hop in and share who you are and have a conversation in a totally disconnected world where like all sorts of people have no one to just listen to them for an hour. Like no one. Like I don't think this is why, and even Gen Z is like the tip of the iceberg. People don't realize how fucked like half of the kids growing up right now are. Like totally effed. Like people have no idea.
Well, and sorry, just to butt in real quick, Nick. That they said that in the lost Q&A, the lost media of Midwestuary. Jonathan Pajot basically said, I forget if it was Jonathan or John Vervaeke, actually. He basically said there's going to be a population split of those kids that, basically melted their minds off of, this insane iPad, consumption. And it's like, yeah, you can't even comprehend what it's going to be like,
No, it's the time machine Morlocks and Eloy, just the completely brain fried hedonists and those that can actually know how to fix things.
So imagine if the TLC flotilla is out there floating and some kid who's like 25 a couple years from now finds some weird like viral TikTok from some TLCer that's designed to like go and get them or like reel them in, and then they hop on a live stream, and by then they're living with their mom on UBI or whatever, and then just people who listen to them and sort of like maybe like I don't even know like what I'm saying. I'm just trying to create like not even create.
Yeah, I'll say this.
Yeah.
As someone that actively is like trying to build something, but not trying to act, go viral, but be I want to, like a big win for me is that if a video has the same amount of views as my subscribers, like that's like the ideal, at this point. And actually at some point it's not the ideal maybe, but the thing about that is the question of like, in Jordan, I mean, because sometimes I've listened to conversations, he's like, this just goes out and someone could find this in 5 years. And I mean, that's the case. I mean, even with his content that I've looked at, and so it's a more healthy way, people talk about evergreen content, but like it's a more healthy way to think about this as being maybe something good that someone will find in a few years or in a week, but you don't ever know. That's how I have to choose to think about this stuff if I'm, as opposed to, oh man, and and I'm not insusceptible to wanting to see number go up and wanting to see, response and we call it the dopamine feed. Hopefully no one's immune to that, because I think it's, but I think that, or maybe hopefully somebody is, but I think that question of even, here's what I would say. Like it's a question worth asking. Do you think that Jordan Peterson was ready? Like, do you think he was ready to go viral? And in a sense, I think he was, not in like a perfect way.
Right.
But like,
I Christian, he was totally ready for the moment for his like biblical lecture. He wasn't ready for like the Daily Wire stuff, but it was that time of obscurity in the desert, feverishly putting all this stuff together. And sorry, you go, Matt.
No, I was just letting you know.
Let me toss in the lore
please.
of like Pajot driving down the road in freaking Canada at night, hearing public broadcast. Broadcast of Peterson's pre-viral maps of meaning, and they made a connection before he went viral. Like, like
Crazy.
the whole Rebel Wisdom documentary of
Oh yeah.
glitch in the Matrix, they caught it.
Yeah.
It was a glitch in the Matrix, and like that's why like short term I'm pretty worried of like apocalypse, but long term like Christ is the Lord of the algorithm. Like there's no containing like the logos. There's no containing it. So like you can do your best to like gear everyone a certain way, but like one tiny little clip gets into someone's head who's like there's just like long term I just know there's no defeating, you know, the logos. So I'm not worried long term, but short term I am worried if
The term is jaded optimism, and that's what I am. So yeah.
I'm curious what Matt, what your thoughts are. You mentioned at the very beginning about going forward, conference embodied stuff.
Yeah.
I know you
Okay.
tweeted a bunch this week about just various things. I'm curious, you know, what's
Yeah.
going on ahead.
Let me offer something up that's sort of like a bid that could kind of redirect us back to the conference where we started talking about. And I was chatting with a Foxman an hour or so before we went live, and he was telling me about his experiences running his IRL estuary. And one of the things he mentions, there's this one guy who is I guess we probably describe him as much more like a fundamentalist Baptist. And that almost seems like, in some sense, like like when he said that, I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's the guy we built Estuary to escape from. And he was talking about this like slow process where this guy very, very gradually started to come around to like what his estuary is about, the kind of conversations they're trying to have, and kind of modeling how to listen to, kind of modeling a certain kind of openness. So in a sense, you could say that, you know, Foxman's work, as he's related to me, is kind of de-radicalizing or de-fundamentaling this guy a little bit. And I'm curious what you guys think about, look at what we're just talking about now, about essentially becoming a community that's actively trying to produce glitches in the matrix, sending out these shards and TikToks into the wider world that's drawing folks in. Like, how do you guys feel about your estuary groups, the estuary protocols' ability to de-radicalize kids from digital brain rot and other things?
I think I don't want to talk much, but the one thing I would say is I think the beauty of my experience estuary at the conference, but also estuary generally, is for someone like that who it maybe comes with a very fundamentalist background of one, or fundamentalist mindset of one way or another, the personal, you know, having someone, at least one person, but usually typically multiple people in your estuary that take things the deeply personal direction and model that openness is such like a needle. I mean, it can just penetrate like so quickly through a fundamentalism, because what do you like, you know, even the hardest fundamentalist of one stripe or another is going to have a hard time not being moved by, you know, a deep personal story that connects with whatever you may be talking about at that time, and an openness that's like touches a humanity that just brings people together, you know, and shows like a vulnerability. So I think that's something that seems, in my limited experience of estuary, like that is such a core feature of the tendency to the personal is always only offered as one, but it somehow always happens, you know?
Right. Well, Gray, I don't think what you're saying is that it's you know, fostering this a sentimentality of such. It's more so seeing the dignity and humanity in a very intimate way, and
Definitely.
allowing that to be brought forth, and like kind of a self-emptying sense, like you're letting them come in and say their piece, and you're actually listening and attentive, and you're intentionally talking about these things. So I think it's that dignity piece, and it's that intentionality that you're bringing out there.
Absolutely. I mean, in Christianized group, not I wouldn't say anything, you know, detailed, but having folks we had a married couple who are strong Christians that had a beautiful story of you know, the wife having been a longtime believer and the husband having just come to belief, and that's why they came to the conference together. And we had two gentlemen who had backgrounds in AA and stuff that had mixed relations with Christianity and everything in between, and just that would seem like it would be just a like rife for potentially a fist fight at some point, or somebody getting up so angry and running away. But instead it's like even with some initial tension, gets to a point where there's just beautiful stories being shared and so much, cohesion, maybe, and not like at the level of propositions, but cohesion, like a spiritual cohesion in the group that can potentially make that, like you said, Matt, that slight like rounding of the edges of the fundamentalism,
So this is just coming to me. From my conversations that I had with Brendan Graham Dempsey last year, I think he sees what we're talking about being beyond actually the higher point of religion that we all already agreed, like that we have like this. It's actually in a sense like higher than this, and like how we participate in our lives, like something has to be higher, and I'm just thinking that the meta modernity is actually finding that this thing that we think is actually supposed to be higher than our worship, which is something like Vervaeke's pluralism and all that kind of thing. But I think that something that this is showing is that we actually have to find the correct place, like underneath that, and know how to get there. And it seems like that place hasn't really existed in our stack of relational ontology very well. And we've always thought, because of the kind of the feels of it, that it's supposed to be higher than like our religious participation. And I don't know, that's just kind of how that, and as far as like thinking going forward, Matt, with that seems to be like the agreed upon thing, is that actually we leave here to go to something higher, and it may not actually be as relational or as personal but it's something higher, like, when we go to church. I don't know.
I think eventually, like on paper, someone could be like, oh, like Estuary is a purely like open inquiry space, and like it is, but in a way it's not. I think I don't think it's taken for granted, but it is. What we describe as Estuary, or this little corner, has inherited a degree, and the reason it exists is because it's grounded and guarded by a certain degree of orthodoxy. And I mean like Chesterton's orthodoxy, not like Eastern Orthodoxy. And there's this vision, and I'm going to keep beating this drum. There's this vision, or this metaphor that Chesterton gives of like the boundaries of Christianity through the ages. And I forget the book that he gives this in, but it's the metaphor is that there's like children playing on top of a mountain, and there's a plateau, and there's walls around the playground, around the play area, and those walls are orthodoxy, right? It's the what seems to the outsider who's maybe a hedonist to be like the strictures of Christianity that actually are the things that allow a society to feast, to play. And I think if we're being honest, the reason why something like TLC and Estuary is so successful is that those walls are there, to one degree or another, and they're very minimal. They're very like lowest common denominator, but they are there to one degree or another. And I don't mean like in like a propositional way or a purely like physical way. Like it's very, there's something like emergence. There's something spiritually emergent about it. And I mean like what seems to be like the spirit of Christ, the spirit of the Logos. But
well, Nick, it's like we've reached, before Christendom, we had the Christians meeting in secret in the catacombs, right? And we came to this end of this strange thing that formed the Western world, and then broader the secular world, that Christendom was this unreal thing, and then it just died. It went out in a whimper or a bang, And I see the TLC as this kind of beginning first fruits, I guess, of this, of what happens in the vacuum of Christendom, and how do we come back to that Christianity of the catacombs that gave birth to this thing, Christendom, that then, decayed and crumbled upon itself. I think this is probably what you're looking at, is that first inklings of what it means to bring it all back together, And I don't mean that just purely ecumenistically. I just mean in terms of rebuilding trust and kind of reorientating our society that lost its incubation.
And that's why it's so important that the organizing figure of this thing, protecting the seed of a mere small orthodoxy, is a Christian Reformed pastor who's been in the trenches for the last 40 years and stops videos to care for the homeless people outside of his office.
And multi-generational.
Yes.
That point too, like that's very good. Like it's almost like a distillation of what was, for a brief period, the very, very good, like, and I mean, like, not now, but like before, like the small s, small l, like secular liberal space that Christendom provided, that it gave birth to, that isn't like a bad thing, right? Like, it like even Chesterton, someone who's like one of my spiritual like fathers, like calls himself a liberal. Like he wrote Heretics because he wanted his adversaries to be better than they were. So he believed in a liberal space, but it's like TLC is a seed of that is no more, because it's become something it's not, but it's still a space that is like a secular liberal space that's somehow spiritually guarded by orthodoxy, which is like a really fine line to follow, but that is kind of what it is. Like that is what we have inherited. So that's a very good point, and yeah, I'm going to think about that for a while.
Matt, you thinking?
Yeah, just something specifically Joseph said about digging back to kind of like the pre-established Christians living in the catacombs. I mean, since we're just coming off of this Fellowship of the Spirit festival, it might be worth your time to dig into specifically the letters of Paul and just think for a second about how pluralistic, trying to bring two very different cultures together, how tenuous his project was for his entire life, and just to keep your eyes open for just how utterly dependent on that emergent spirit he was for this whole thing to come together. He's like, if God's not real, this thing is gonna fall apart.
Yeah, and then remember at the end of Acts, right? You're right. He is looking at this and he's thinking it's so fragile, but he's firmly established in a faith that this will not end. And he says to the Jewish leaders in Rome, he says that the Gentiles will hear this and they will accept it. And it's like, okay, dude, you're sitting in a prison cell in Rome and the churches back home are in just a mess. And, he's saying this with such confidence and precision, it's kind of what I feel like here, but not to the same degree, but, something like that.
I got to tell you, I think that's in part like Paul's rhetoric. That's sort of him believing this vision he's received from God. But as far as like Paul, the person looking at his project, looking at where it is at the end of his life, I'm not sure. Like Paul is living in faith. He does not see what this thing is going to become. Like Paul himself had to depend tremendously on what God was going to do with this little seed that he felt so compelled to plant, because it didn't look like much by the time he was dead and gone.
Man. Woo. That's how I feel. Unless anyone has something else, I think that's like, I mean, that's kind of a pregnant with intensity. There's two things that have come to my mind, unless anyone wants to take those thoughts forward. But one just being, any, I mean, well, 3, I guess, speaker topics. I know those have been like done on the internet. It's a week, so we're super late. And then, but also any more like pragmatic ideas about conferencing or whatever, because we've still kind of landed in more of like the abstract some. And then Grimm's post on trolls.
Well, I was gonna. Sorry, finish.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's it. Those are some topics.
Well, just to touch on the troll thing, and I think Matt will probably have some good thoughts, but just to pull from what you just said, Matt, at the end, like about Paul, all of that about what he's writing is true, and within it, not every single letter, but like you look at Ephesians or you look at Colossians, they start with this really super high abstract theology and finish with the behavioral guardrails or fruits of the Spirit, but also go and do this. Like, wives, submit to your husbands, husbands, submit to your wives, like children, submit to your parents, like do the very practical things that will allow the Spirit within this community to survive and flourish. And like relating that to the TLC and to trolls a little bit of like you can take that idea and say like, you know, how do we evaluate, or to touch on Neil's point, how do we discern, you know, people's intentions? And like, that's where that's where Orthodoxy helps, man. The fruits of the Spirit, like they are evergreen and are really good filters for understanding both individual intentions and like the Spirit as it shifts, you know.
Keep going, guys.
I mean, I just held down court for a minute. I can tell you about some of the seeds I think I have hope that could be planted in the near future, but I'll cede time for a couple minutes here and let you guys fill the space if you'd like.
I mean, I'm curious. I was your tweets about more embodied and physically focused small conferences like in Yosemite, that definitely got me. I mean, I think a guy who we cannot have another large conference without like kidnapping and bringing is Rafe Kelly. There's no way I know he was at, I think, Midwestuary, but just like he belongs everywhere with this movement, because the embodied piece, he brings a lot to the table. I've always been fascinated. That's a guy I would love to climb a mountain with, you know. But
you know what that makes me think of is I could see in a practical sense, because, you know, so I've been to Symbolic World Summit, ARC, and Midwestuary, and John Heers has been at all of them doing supers. And of course, it's kind of this exclusive thing, right? But I could see Rafe doing something similar. It would still have to be exclusive because you can't have 300 people. It doesn't make sense. It has to literally be under 20. But like, if there was like this, you know, those VIP type things, like with Rafe, or super type things that really are like but what happens when those happen is those people get, it goes out, and there's a liturgy that binds in those experiences. And I can see on like a mirrored level, like Rafe doing something like, practically speaking, offering, you know, come a day before, you know, and some people are going to be doing Rafe Kelly, you know, embodiment. So
yeah, and you talk about pilgrimage. I mean, you know, what Rafe's bringing and what John brings, like these are pieces, like the pilgrimage was so much in the background of everything that was talked about by the speakers, and sometimes explicitly, but that's that conversation around pilgrimage, I think, is something that we need to keep going, because it's so, and Matt, I'm sure, you know, the going to Yosemite, like that is the American natural pilgrimage. Like if there's one place, like that is our place. So anyways.
Or Yellowstone.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't mean.
Well,
I'm just thinking of the American imaginal, but
I mean,
Yeah.
I went on like a family road trip a couple years back, and we hit like a couple of the Arizona and Utah state parks, and I just got bit by the bug, and now I am just trying to check all of them off of my list. I've been about like a third of the way through, but that's just as a hobby when I have free time and spare cash. That's just a thing that I'm pursuing. Just and finding nerds to go with me would be amazing.
Totally.
I'm spoiled in that I live in the Pacific Northwest, so I live about like there are 3 separate amazing national parks inside of like 3 hours from me,
Ooh.
and I'll just say like open invitation. If you guys want to make your way out here, we'll hang out and we'll go touch some grass and see some woods. There's incredible opportunities out here. My area has kind of become it's low key kind of an estuary powerhouse. We've got 2 big ones running and
That's
another
cool.
one that's I think about to hatch in Seattle. So there's a lot happening out here, and I'm kind of excited about the potential for this being more of a hub for hosting things.
Yeah.
And frankly, if that wasn't the case, I would have probably just bounced right off of PBK's videos. I started watching appreciatively, but there were a few in-person events. Like PBK was here just to help launch an estuary in like way, way, way out Worrell, Washington, and I went down to go see because I'm like, I see this guy's YouTube videos, and it was only because I went there and I met in real life Nate and I met Afriel and a couple other folks that I'm like, okay, again, like the first round of like, I know who I'm talking to online. I have people's phone numbers now. This is not insane. And it's just gradually sort of like bringing me into first the physical space of doing estuary together, and then that becomes that sort of like physical relational security became a space for me to be launched into the digital.
That's good.
When did you feel secure enough to bring out the balloon art?
I don't know, because honestly, I still kind of like my initial intention was to keep that completely and totally at a distance. The whole reason I have the Skankenstein handle is to create a separation between my professional life and you nerds. Because there's probably going to be coming a time when I'm going to be developing online content underneath my, my professional handle and stuff like that. And so I'm thinking a lot about the different kind of profiles and what kind of like secular entertainer Matt is versus Christian Skankenstein on the internet, and trying to figure out how to manage those two. And so that's
I love that the Stankenstein side is the Christian side.
Gotta give him some friction. I love so much how awkward so many people are trying to say my name. It's hilarious to me.
Yeah, it's kind of like, do I want to say skank? Do I want to call this person a skank? That's what goes through my mind. It's like, I don't like calling you skank, but it's there. So what about trolls, guys? What about,
I'm a big troll. I'm a big fan of trolling. I think it's great. It can go too far. You don't feed the trolls, but no, I think they're this kind of falls into that discernment question, I think, of intentions at these gatherings, and I almost think that there can be like a reverse troll that Gray and Ethan and I'm forgetting his other name, but we were doing a little bit of trolling, and it was a trolling to really test if you were in the know in the TLC lingo, I guess. But I don't know. There can be these fun, playful ways to,
Well, yeah, and then I went up and asked a very earnest question, so I didn't actually troll them because I didn't think I would get picked, but that was funny.
What about like people with that malintent, I guess, a little more than trolling?
Yeah, malicious trolling. I honestly, I haven't seen a good amount of malicious trolling in the TLC that's effective. I've only seen trolling that will get like boomers, like into like a Facebook argument in a YouTube comment section. real full-blown like toxic trolling. I just don't think it's big enough at this point to bring about those dark figures. And I think the best way to deal with trolling is just to not engage with it, because it's largely just for laughs, or it's out of ideological differences. So, I mean, I don't know much. I could give you a whole lecture on trolling, but
the way I see it, I gotta hop off here in a second. But the way I see it is that there's too much good and genuine fellowship and like goodwill going on between the people I've seen involved thus far for there to be much air for like any genuine trolling. And also and this is where the benefit of like, I know some boomers could be susceptible to real trolling on Facebook or whatever it is, but the older folks that are involved in this movement to me seem for the most part to be extremely wise, thoughtful.
Imagine someone trying to troll Ron Copperman. Okay, the guy would just,
or Dr. Jim. Like
Dr. Jim would he would reach through the
to
computer and grab the guy, but Ron would reach through the computer and place his hands on him and pray with him.
Yeah, exactly. And like Dr. Jim and Ron, like I'm just not, if we're gonna be just fine, I think. But I gotta go, guys. My iPad's dying. I got a baby asleep. So
all right, man. Great.
Can I say one thing about Gray before he goes?
Yes.
Just sure. that there's a counterpoint to the whole thing. I don't think I actually met you at Chicago, Gray.
When you were handing out the zines, we had a brief interaction, but we never actually had a conversation.
I was gonna say, like, I met like 1,000 people, and you weren't like on my radar at all. So even like now today, like this is a guy, as far as I know, I'm meeting digitally for the first time. But still, because of the network that we're in, I still like have a certain sort of, I don't know, like I'm experiencing like you're coasting off of Christians and Joseph's and Nick's regard for you, and that's enough for me to like be open and vulnerable and look forward to more of these in the future.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, man. It was fun, guys. I appreciate it. Fun to talk to you guys anytime.
Yep.
Thanks, Gray.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, we got about 10 minutes left, and so one of the things I was thinking about for the conference type stuff, or where to go, there was kind of, let's see, I had something and I feel like I've lost it. Was there I don't know, was there anywhere else you guys were thinking we should go with this conversation?
I feel content, but I don't want to speak for Mr. Skankenstein or Nick.
Oh man. Oh well. Okay. Yeah. So the thing. Okay. Here's what I had. It was we haven't talked about AI, and we haven't talked about well, that we did hit on discerning, and it's kind of with this digital space is adjacent to that. So, but I didn't know if that was anything we wanted to tap on, and if Nick, Matt, what were you about to say?
To say, like, not if we've got like a 10-ish minute time cap. That's not a thing that I think is wise to open at this point.
Another thing I feel like maybe it doesn't play into it, but eventually it will, but it's not in a 10-minute period, is there is more to say on the Dreer Elizabeth Oldfield
exchange.
Yeah.
And that's why even in Bethel McGrew's excellent recap, which really sort of ties everything together for anyone who's not familiar at all. I sent it to my mom, like, hey, this is what I was up to. This is why you watch the kids for 48 hours. She's like, I got to give this thing a whole separate discussion, because I don't know exactly how it plays into it, because I don't want to just like get into like not even a political discussion, but like a whole different 2 screens, 1 screen, like what's going on thing. but at some point that will be worth another discussion. Maybe that's when the videos come out, and Paul will certainly commentate on it, and we will comment on it. But that would be another thing besides AI that I just think is more worth more discussion than maybe where people are giving it.
Mhm. I think that's the piece I'm most excited to revisit digitally out of everything that's going to come out. That and Vervaeke's speeches.
What about you, Joseph?
I'm just gutted that the lost media of the first Q&As, forever gone, because seeing John Vervaeke was so worked up, it was a treat. But I think Nick's right. And Matt, they're just both right. What can I say? No, but I do think there were some people that were upset that Sam basically poked that bear, Sam Tiedemann, when he basically cornered Rod and Elizabeth to talk about the migrant crisis. And I gotta say, I think Rod did a great job in that moment. But yeah, a sticky thing. I don't know if that was to test the limits of the environment or what the strategy was there from Sam. But it was interesting.
Sam did say in his vid that Elizabeth Oldfield knew that was going to be broached. She wasn't taken aback.
Okay.
Yeah, which makes me feel like 10 times better about it. It's
right.
But also, like, I felt at that point we needed a little bit more friction in the conference than we'd gotten from the speakers. I was delighted to see that happen and how it played out.
Yeah, right. No, and that was like, I think the first real point besides the Q&A of the first night, which it wasn't like a Dialogos that you saw until then. But anyways.
Well, guys, I agree. Sometimes those confrontations they feel intense for me, but it was interesting that they did. I feel like they did the best they could. Everyone did. I agree with Nick. I think that, at least from my biased perspective, that Rod kind of felt more confident in his position, I guess you could say, in a way, but that ultimately it was good. And as far as Sam's intentions, if he knew that he was going to kind of maybe play that card, I kind of wonder if there's kind of like, hey, is there something kind of spicy that can get a little viral out of this thing? But also to that treatment about the TikToks earlier, that is it possible that we could send something out that is a different contrast of how this is usually handled, and it be something somebody could grab onto. So guys, I think this has been good. I've really enjoyed it. And I thank Matt for putting this together, and excited to get this out there and see what, people are thinking. And there will be more roundtables, square roundtables in the future. So guys, thank y'all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for hosting, Christian. This was great.
All right.